to another episode of Face to Face with, which is brought to you by the No BS Spiritual Book Club. And this is where our contributors join us to tell us the stories behind the books that made the biggest difference to them on their spiritual journeys. And tonight we're face to face with lecturer, counsellor, coach, and advisor to business and government leaders, scientists, psychologists, and spiritual seekers, Penney Peirce, who also happens to be the author of an award-winning visionary series of guidebooks on personal and societal transformation. And her books include The Intuitive Way, The Definitive Guide to Increasing Your Awareness, Frequency, The Power of Personal Vibration, which is my personal favorite, Leap of Perception, The Transforming Power of Your Attention, and Transparency, Seeing Through to Our Expanded Human Capacity. Before we begin, two important things. If you have any questions that you wish to ask Penney, just type them in the chat window as we go along with your name and your location, and Sharon will read them out for us later in the show. So now, Penney Peirce, welcome.
It's so good to be back with you, Sandie.
And it's so good to be talking to you again. It's always a great conversation.
Yes, it sure is.
It is, yeah. And thank you for agreeing to share the stories behind, you know, the picks. This is the fascinating part because, you know, you give us your picks and you tell us a little bit about what was so great about them. But on these live video interviews, we really get to get some of the intimate details behind that, which is something that I really like, digging that little bit deeper.
It's actually fun going back and thinking about these as well, you know, and how that added to everything. So yeah, I hadn't thought about it for a long time.
I know, and I'm hearing this from everybody actually saying, oh my goodness, you know, it was a task or it was this, but once I got into it, I really found it a fun experience because you relive some of the times and some of the places that you were at back then.
Right.
Yeah. So I know you've said that these books were highly instrumental in helping you wake up and develop greater wisdom and compassion, and that there are common elements in them all. And you said you've integrated them into yourself over the years. And the common element is that they all have a quality of deep honesty, resonance with higher truth, and a succinct, personal, direct writing style. Is the writing style really important to you?
It is, because, you know, I tried to read like Alice Bailey and a lot of those really heavily esoteric books, and it just goes right through my mind. I know there's good information there, but the ones that really talked, that were able to translate higher stuff down to a really clear personal level, and not to waste words and not to get too egotistical around language. You know, those spoke to me, but they also inspired me about how I want to write. You know, it's a style that to me, it's very tactile. You know, it like, it's not just streaming through the upper part of the brain, it's actually coming down through the senses and the reptile brain and like landing, you know, and then once I can feel it, boy, I've got it. You know, I don't have to think about it too much. It pretty much integrates very quickly.
Yeah. And that is a really important thing for me. It never used to be, but the older I get, the more I read, the simpler a book is, the more powerful I find it.
Yeah. I did a lot of work in Japan over the years, and a lot of the Japanese writing is very simple, you know, like haiku. You know, I've gotten so much out of reading haikus and writing them too. It's just like encapsulating an entire scene or mood or something like that. And then some of the other books that I mentioned in my list, some of the those teachers, they are making the truth of the energy of what they're saying actually exist in the words. And then it was like, oh my gosh, these are living words. And I thought, I really want to be able to write like that. You know, someday, you know, I'm going to really try. Yeah. So,
You know, that is so true. I was interviewing somebody last week who was talking about the transmission that occurs through words. And we don't often think about that part, but there is a transmission that occurs.
no,
And this is why
yeah.
books move us so much.
Well, that's right. You know, and language is alive. You know, it is the breath, you know, coming out of us. And that's why I'm always so fascinated with word origins. You
Yes.
know, I want to go back to the core, like I said, something in one of my books, radical truth or something. I don't know which, I think it was in Transparency. And say, well, what was radical? You know, it's not like crazy, wild, weird, political. It means root. You know, so
Yeah.
if you go back to say, what is the real core radical thing? It's the real truth, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I love that.
Well, you've been a little bit naughty. You know, what's so interesting to me with this book club is I said 10 and 10 only.
Right.
And people slip them in like, oh, well, I do like their other 3 books. Could you add them as well?
Yeah, here's my
And
other paragraph that has these other ones in there. Yeah.
yeah, so we've got a few of those sprinkled throughout, but let's start with the book that we put down as number 1, although I know that yours are not necessarily in
They're not
order.
in any order. No.
But this is a powerful
Yeah.
book for many people, and that is Seth Speaks and the Seth
Yeah.
Material by
The
Jane.
Seth Material. Yeah. I think I was just, you know, I was a designer before I got into doing all this. So I was in New York at that time, and I was doing design, and I happened to get that book. And it's like one of those wake up calls, you know, like I always had thought about that there were hidden reasons for things and mystical things behind it. I always believed in past lives, and for some, you know, just for some reason. Uh, but when I started reading that, first of all, mediumship really struck a chord with me and felt real. You know, I didn't question it at all. But partly that was because the content of what came through Jane Roberts was so um, authentic, and but also it was straightforward, but it also had this like 1 degree different angle from what the way I was thinking, and that I find is the way I really learn things. If it's straight on, you know, but if it comes a little bit over here, then it goes click, and it, I really am interested and I get it. And that's what her stuff did for me. And it just opened up these concepts about levels of the self and so forth, that they were patterns of knowledge, patterns of thinking that opened me into a more interdimensional way of understanding life. So that was one of the first big ones, actually.
Do you recall how old you were then when you came across that
Oh,
book?
20, maybe.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how did you come across it? Did somebody give it to you, or were you
Oh my
actively
gosh.
searching for books?
I don't remember. I don't know that I was actively searching. Although you know, I did have a subscription to Psychic magazine that was published in San Francisco by Jim Boland back in those days, and Jean Shinoda Boland, it was his wife, you know, and it might have been in there or something. I might have followed the breadcrumb trail, but you know, before that, when I was in high school, I was reading a lot like Eric Fromm and Vernon Howard and some of these other ones that were sort of about thinking.
Yes.
And changing your thoughts and stuff. Yeah.
So book number 2 is Initiation by Elizabeth H. I know that, is it pronounced H? Because it's not English, is it?
No, well,
No.
it sounds German to me, but I'm not sure.
I was looking her up earlier, and her name actually wasn't Elizabeth. It was a German name that was very similar. So I did wonder about the pronunciation of her surname.
Right,
But that one was published in 1953. And what fascinated you about that one?
And it was another one that came to me, sort of fell into my lap. I didn't know anything about this, and I started reading it, and she's recalling past lives in Egypt and a lot of the initiatory things that went on. And I'm like, again, it's almost like just remembering, like I'm reading it and it's like, oh, I know, just um, knowledge almost like immediately reintegrating into me, and then shocking me that I would know this, like, who am I to know this? I wasn't doing any of this work then yet, and that's the way a lot of the early books were. And oddly, they were all very esoteric. The early books were highly, unusual. They weren't like a typical psychology book or something. But these things fell into place, and I think they aligned me or something.
Again, a
when
transmission.
I was little, my father was the son of a Baptist minister who was forced to go to church like on Wednesdays and Sundays, and it was very proper and all of this, and he really rebelled against that. So when I was 5, my mother thought I should be going to church. So she took me over to the Presbyterian church, and I did not like it at all. I didn't like Jesus. I was scared of Jesus. I thought, why would all the little children run to him with that beard and everything? And so they would put me in the basement of the church with all the little kids for Sunday school class, and I would go out the back door and go up into the balcony of the church and, count the mink stoles or the bald heads or whatever, entertain myself until it was time for them to come and get me again. And I'd run back down there and pretend like I'd been there the whole time. And so my mother said to my father, she is not going to church. And he goes, oh, leave the girl alone. She'll figure it out on her own. Thank goodness. So I think from that point on, I was like very leery about even saying the word God. I didn't want to say it until I knew what it was, and so a lot of these more metaphysical things started to come in, which I think was something that the soul, kind of set it up that way so that I wouldn't get drawn back into the church again, because a lot of my past lives are in the church, and I just wanted to broaden it out again in this life. So, and that's, I think, what happened. It was all this resonance to these esoteric teachings.
I read a word the other day that I'd never come across before. And I'm not, it's one of those that I keep forgetting, and I have to go back and look at what it was. It's something like amnesis. And it was in a book by Robert Moss, who he does active dreaming. And he encapsulated with that word something that I'd puzzled about. I mentioned a couple of weeks ago in one of these interviews, having an experience at a certain age when, instead of just looking and searching and seeking for information, it was as if the information came alive within me. And the only way I could ever describe what had happened was suddenly understanding that I hadn't been seeking information. I wasn't learning, I was trying to remember. And that word amnesis is exactly what you're talking about. The experience you had with these books, and those ones that do that for us, I think are so important.
So powerful, and it's like the light switch got turned on in a room, and it's like, woo, and it's like, how would you have a life where you would come in, have to regain all this knowledge you had in other lifetimes? Well, you have to dole it out to yourself, little bit, that builds on this builds on that. Oh, let's weave this strand in, and then shamanism, and then this one, and then Japan, and all these things. That's the way it was for me in my early life. And it still is in a way, but getting more nuances of principles and things, and sensing things that are a little less earthly at this point, more intergalactic kinds of stuff at this point. But the first parts were all about ancient wisdom. Yeah.
Now, you said about that particular book that you knew that you had been there in Egypt. Yeah. Have you had a past life experience that has given you more memories of having been in Egypt?
Yes, I've led 2 tours to Egypt, and I've been in the King's Chamber and the sarcophagus twice, and had phenomenal instantaneous visions and stuff from actually being there. But before we went in, the nights before, I had dreams of being a priest in there, and a bald head, man, and all that. So yes. Yeah.
Well, that probably explains also the third book then, which is the Emerald Tablets of Fluff, the Atlantean. And that one was published, get this,
way back,
37,000 years ago.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That came to me also in the very early years, and it came through a Native American woman that I knew, and it was mimeographed copies of these translations of these evidently real tablets that were discovered in South America, and by the White Brotherhood or something, and it's an amazing kind of rhythm to the writing. It's like this, it's almost like Beowulf or something, it's got this thing, and as you read it, you just kind of go into this trance state almost, and start remembering these things. At least I did. And wow. It is very much the early, what I think of the Hermetic teachings that came to Egypt, but it's Atlantean and before, a lot of very high kind of knowledge, and what happens, I think, when you are initiated into higher states and you are moving between dimensions and things like that. So it's pretty far out, but there are some gorgeous quotes in that book as well, single quotes that are just like, you read one quote and you go, oh.
Do you remember any of them?
No, not offhand. I've put some of them in my books.
It's interesting. I was checking into that particular book, and of course it was translated in 1925. And you're right, the translation was published solely through the Brotherhood of the White Temple. Yeah. And what the Wikipedia always makes me smile. Wikipedia said that the Emerald Tablets is a 13-chapter fictional work of New Age philosophy written by Maurice Doreal in 1939. Yeah. Right. It will not accept that it could be real.
Right. Or that the Course in Miracles, could be done that way too. Yeah. But it's very beautiful.
Is it easy to read?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It is.
Easy to read.
Because I tried reading can't remember what it was called, but the Hurtak book. And I just found that so convoluted.
Yes, and like the Urantia book and some of those things are, kind of like the Alice Bailey thing. There's a lot of stuff in there, and it's very confusing to me. Just not quite simple enough.
Yeah. Well, our next is actually more than one book. This is where you started slipping the extras in. This is the Starseed Transmissions, The Return of the Bird Tribes and the Third Millennium, and also Vision by Ken Carey. So what did you like so much about his books?
It was another person delineating the same visions that I had had. Almost somehow down to the same phrases and words. And I was like, oh my gosh. And again, but his are about like what is happening on the planet, what is going on now in this time. And it's almost like I had slightly forgotten why I came here and what was going to be happening and how exciting this lifetime would be, and that I'd been waiting a long time to live this life. And he helped me remember that and really get back into my alignment with my life purpose, maybe, but he Ken Carey was a a farmer, and I think he lived out in Missouri. He was not in the city at all, and he had gotten sick, and he started to get this kind of download, and he just typed it out. And some of it is exquisitely beautiful, very poetic, and yeah, it's.
And are some of his, prophecies coming to pass?
I think so. It's not like he had specific prophecies about this will happen then, but it's like the process of what we are going through, which I've to explain in all my books about transformation, that, that there is a very much a bigger process going on, and it is very positive. It's not a frightening thing when you feel it. It's like what we've all been waiting for.
You said something to the effect of, this is the lifetime that you've waited a long time for.
Right. Yeah.
Is it turning out like you hoped or expected?
I didn't know what to expect. But every time the next chapter of something happens, or the next book comes through to want to be written, then I go, oh, I see why that's happening now. Like the whole, pandemic thing that we're experiencing at this point was a surprise, because the first of this year, I was like so excited about the year. We're going to have expansion and everything. And then this happened. And then I thought, well, this is expansion. This is us clearing ourselves of all that's in the way. So many people are getting a chance to really choose the kind of reality they want. And it is instrumental in, the transformation process. It's like, I couldn't have designed anything better. It's, it's so weird though, because things often look one way and then they really act and have an opposite result.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I keep track of the astrology, and yes, it was, of all the things that I would have expected, and there were many, your imagination can come up with a lot of things. We're a very creative species, but this was not one of them.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So number 5, and again, you slipped in quite a few there, is
it's hard to pick one.
The Carlos Castaneda series.
Right. I mean, they all go together, there's not one that stands out over another, but that whole series, I think I've read 3 times. It is, basically about shamanism, but it's also about multidimensional reality and just, gosh, so many concepts in there, and dreaming, and the daily reality being a dream, and so many things that it woke me up again.
Yeah. I remember where I was when I was given the teachings of Don Juan. I was on my very first trip to see my sister in Canada, and I'd been saving for this trip for a long time, and she'd arranged all kinds of wonderful journeys, up the Inside Passage and driving back down through Vancouver. And she gave me this book to read, The Teachings of Don Juan. And then she did nothing but moan at me, because in the car, I'm not looking at the amazing scenery. I've got my head stuck in this book. And I just thought, well, you've given me this book, and I'm sorry. It's taken me somewhere else.
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember I actually got to meet Carlos Castaneda back, I don't know even when that was. And it was so surprised at his physical. He's just kind of a nice, slightly plump, shortish guy, really nice guy, very private. But
I heard that he finished up living in Westwood in LA, and that just doesn't compute. He should be in New Mexico or Arizona or the desert or something.
Where it was LA. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, did you learn anything from him?
No, just the presence, just like feeling the presence of someone, which is, I guess you learn from that. Things are transmitted. I had a whole phase of studying shamanism and all that goes with that, so, and then I realized, well, I'm not supposed to just be one thing in this life. I'm not going to just be a shaman. I'm not just going to be a priest. I'm not going to be a whatever. I'm synthesizing.
Yes.
So I explored so many things and then added it into the hopper. It's like, I think of it like making a stew, you know, like I had to activate things, move on to the next one, put everything in perspective, you know, and see how it all fit together.
Is there anything in particular that you could point to that you feel studying shamanism has done for you or given to your work?
I think it gave me an incredibly direct experience in nature of when I was looking at a flower, then it was looking at me. And the more I went into it, the more it came into me. And there was like this, you know, profound experience of communion and oneness that came from almost like seeing the other things, just you doing the same thing you're doing. It was like, you know, it kind of blows your mind when it dissolves your personal identity into something that's so much larger than you thought.
Yes.
Do you know?
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, The Mind of the Cells by Sat Prem and Sri Aurobindo, and The Adventure of Consciousness by Sat Prem. Fascinating reading. I haven't read the books, but I did read up on Sat Prem today, and I am very familiar with Sri Aurobindo's work.
Right.
So tell us, where were you in your life, and what did those books do for you?
I was already practicing as an intuitive and doing readings and teaching some metaphysics when I came across The Mind of the Cells. And as I read that, again, it opened up this huge thing about the body, the consciousness of the body and of the physical plane itself, and how, you know, the mother, who was Aurobindo's sort of companion, I guess you would say, they weren't married, I don't think, but she basically went down and into her body with her consciousness and reprogrammed her cells to not operate off of fear, but to operate off of love. And as she got them out of their old programming, it's like her body didn't quite know what to do. And she would faint and fall, and, you know, until the love reality took over and she had a new set of instructions, basically. And she really transformed herself from the very particle-based level, you know, and that gave me a huge understanding, especially of divine feminine consciousness and what women are doing, as opposed to monks who try to get out of themselves and meditate, you know, in a larger thing. Women tend to come in and down and love the body and love the earth and get very involved with very earthy things, you know. So it gave me a huge perspective. And then Aurobindo, of course, I mean, his writing is, again, it's like a soul group or a pool of knowledge that feels extremely familiar to me. That's like a family feeling, you know. I can relate to anything that he writes, and she too.
Mm. You know, reading about the mother and what she did with her body, something you wrote in your description, the cells adapted and life became frictionless. The life force flowed without restriction. The soul became fully embodied. Her path to discover a new way to be human required immense patience and discipline, and she was able to paint a tactile picture of the divine feminine path into enlightenment, the path down and in, not up and out. I have to tell you something about that. You talk about a new way to be human, and the things that she actually did with her body that one would imagine are impossible to do. But I know I have a friend who works multidimensionally with a lot of the autistic population, and she has actually seen these children changing the molecular structure of things within their body and what they eat. And I don't doubt her at all. So, and these children are really, they are evidence of the new human. So I find that really interesting, the way to be a new human, and makes me wonder, you know, we're all capable of doing this. I guess it takes a lot of discipline.
Yes. You know, and a lot of it really gave me that idea that we don't really have to learn anymore. We just have to remove the obstacles to what we already know as souls, you know, about universal principles, you know, and we just have all these yes, buts and shoulds and things that are in the way. And so much of what we do is based on the fear of being rejected or dying or not having something, or, you know, the nots, instead of just living in the flow of what is, of existence. You know, and she really brought that home to me, you know, that when you're in the fear, you know, it just blocks energy, and that if you can remove the fear, then everything just, you know, just comes through.
And I read that there was a lot of fear in that ashram, because later on, towards the end of her life, there were all kinds of problems going on there, and Satprem became a bit of a persona non grata. He thought that several of the ashram sadhaks did not want the mother to continue her life, and there was something that I read that said that when she actually died, her body was buried in the second chamber of Sri Aurobindo's samadhi in the ashram courtyard, and that something that when they actually, something happened to the vessel that was her body, and some of the people in the ashram said that she attained a supramental body, and what remained was the residue, like the empty cocoon of a caterpillar after it has become a butterfly. I mean, that's mind-blowing.
Yes. Well, yeah, I can imagine. She, you know, basically going against all the teachings and doing something entirely different, really. You know, so for that, you have to congratulate her for being, you know, such an innovator.
Yeah, for sure. Are those books easy to read?
Yes, very easy to read.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
They're going on my list.
Yeah.
So, number 8, I Am That, by Sri Nisargadatta.
Gardata,
yeah. But tell us about that, because you've said in your description that you're not particularly drawn to gurus, but he was an amazing person.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm not really into high priests and gurus and anything like that. But this guy, I mean, I think he ran a tobacco shop or something for a while. And I don't know that much about him, but the book is basically, it's a lot of conversations from students asking him questions and then him answering. And they're simple, profound kinds of examples and teachings that come through in sometimes a single sentence. And again, this is one of the books where the words carried the energy. You could feel where he was while he was talking. You could feel the state he was in while he was answering. And it's a bit like the Emerald Tablets too. There's layers of meaning in each sentence. So you have to read deeply, you know, pay attention, fall into it. And it's an amazing book.
For someone who's not into gurus and priests, there are a few of them in your list.
Yeah, well, yeah. I just don't want to worship individual people. You know, I think that that anybody is capable of that. I remember once, I didn't really, you know, I told you I was kind of afraid of Jesus, and I didn't really get connected up to Jesus until I was in my 30s, where I had a picture of him from Mount Shasta. I'm sure people have seen it. It's supposedly a photograph that appeared again in South America somewhere, and it's kind of like the eyes follow you. And I had it up on the wall, and I was just looking at it. And then I would say I would sometimes stop and stare at it. I'd say, "Well, let me serve you," or I would say something, and then he would say, "Let me serve you," and it would just always be the exact same intonation, the exact same words, like until it just became a joke, like, okay, I get it. You know, like there's not that much difference between anybody. You know, like don't put me up on the thing because we're the same. It's just like the flower in nature. You know, you start to go into it and it becomes one.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so I found that with like with Nisargadatta, just felt like a regular person. You know, I like that.
Yeah. Well, we're all regular people, aren't we? Every
Yes.
single one of us. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, number 9, awakened imagination. Another trio, actually
Yes.
probably more than a trio.
Right.
The Power of Awareness, The Neville Reader, etc. by Neville Goddard. Now, I have to confess, his name has been coming up so many times lately. I had never come across it in the past. So tell us a little bit about Neville Goddard, who's no longer with us, I believe,
Right.
and what it is about his books and why they're coming up now.
He, I think he was from the West Indies and got involved with the New Thought churches and teachings. But his way of describing things was so simple and clear, universal principles, you know, that you could use in everyday life. He also had a way of interpreting the Bible in a way that talked about how this passage meant something about consciousness. And I was like, oh, I get it. This is really useful to me. It's not just words. Very humble guy, clear writing. I want to say, I think he might have died in 1971. So he was more contemporary.
72 he died, yeah.
72, okay, somewhere right there.
Yeah.
And no, I just think he's a very underappreciated spiritual teacher, and I love his books.
You say that his books teach us the nuances of working with perception, mental, emotional, and physical in the present moment. And perception is something that I think many of us don't give enough credit to. And you've written about perception a lot. And it's one of those things that has endlessly fascinated me throughout my life, how we can all look at the same thing and come away with a completely different opinion about it. And tell us about some of the nuances, as you say, of working with perception that you got from that book.
Well, again, it reinforced a lot of the things that I'd been observing myself through having done thousands of readings for people and watching how the issues in their physical life were kind of a materialization of the way that they were thinking. So that really everything for me started to come back to perception, and reality came out of what you place your attention on. And he elucidated that so well in all the principles of, you know, it's like the Abraham Hicks stuff, you know, it's kind of similar. They're talking about many of the same principles. He was much earlier, of course. You know, but yeah, really, I think it's about my book, Leap of Perception. That's where I really focused on this whole thing of how transformation today is really about that we are changing perception from an old linear model of the way we think to one that's spherical and holographic, which is all in the present moment. And as that shifts, reality shifts. The perception and reality are so connected, you know, and your own personal identity is tied up with your perception and reality, or creates it, you know. And so all these things are tied together. And you know, that's what's exciting about this day and age, is that everything is speeding up. And as it does, life comes into the present moment. Everything's become more instantaneous and miraculous.
When you use the words spherical and holographic, tell me what you mean by that.
Oh boy, that's all in my book. But basically, it's the idea that it's not past, present, future. You are in the center of a big ball of reality. You could call it your aura, but it's your sphere of influence, your sphere of reality. Yeah. And you never leave the center. And in the sphere is a particular kind of energy or frequency of consciousness that you've chosen to vibrate at. You know, and you know, if you're depressed, then your whole sphere will vibrate to depression, and then you'll get experiences coming out of that sphere that match that frequency. Yeah. If you're joyful, you'll get that, you know. So, but the sphere expands and contracts, and as it comes down and gets more dense and small, it becomes more physical, and as it goes out and gets more expansive and inclusive, it becomes, you know, more multidimensional, and you have more time, more space. Everything's all in there with you. And in that way, then that big ball has swallowed up the past and swallowed up the future. And they become simply other alternate frequencies that you could put your attention into, and they would become realities for you if you want them to, you know. So a lot of it, I just have come to the conclusion really that attention is the most powerful skill and force that we have, you know.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, we do live in a time where so much is changing. I mean, literally, you know, every week. You think about our grandparents, and life went on the same way for decades. I remember reading a book by Robert Anton Wilson many years ago, and it was a book. He said something in there about, I no longer believe anything. What I say is, this is what I believe at this moment. And at the time I read that, I was still locked into, no, of course, you know, you have your beliefs. And then, of course, that changed very, very quickly. And, you know, this whole thing about belief now has become, you know, the same thing for me. I don't believe anything. I might put my attention on something and give it some credence for a few minutes or, you know, a few weeks, but I don't think that we can believe.
We don't need to, you know, that it's more that when you encounter truth, which is capital T truth, that is part of the universal laws of the way consciousness and energy actually work, you don't have to believe it. You experience it, and it adheres in our nature. You know, you don't get it and have it and keep it and hoard it. It's just there, you know, so you don't have to have beliefs. They just lock down the flow.
Yeah.
So you can have lots of thoughts if you want, and experiences, you know, but, you know, we do need our left brain to make things intelligible, but we shouldn't, you know, lock it down into rules.
Yeah,
for
sure. So Joseph Chilton Peirce, Evolution's End, The Biology of Transcendence, Cracking the Cosmic Egg. I just love his Magical Child book.
I love him.
Magical Teens. Yeah, yes. I wish I'd had the chance to talk to him.
Oh, I know. His wonderful blend of, you know, being very spiritual and on a spiritual path for a long time, and, you know, biology and science and psychology and everything. And his work on the heart and the brain and oh my gosh, he was just such an early leader in so many things.
Yeah. I mean, he was a giant as far as I'm concerned. And what a gift he left parents. Just, you know, to give us that understanding. Just amazing. When did you come across his work, and how did his work, you know, how did it move you on your path?
Yeah, had probably already written a book or two and was well on my way. And I think I got Biology of Transcendence first, and Evolution's End, which were very much about transformation then at that point, which was tying in with what I was thinking about. And he gave grounded examples and techniques and things. I can't remember what all it was now, but it clicked things together for me, you know, and it gave me more of an understanding of how the body was actually being involved in this, as well as just the perception. Yeah, so yeah, he combined the physical and psychological with the spiritual in such a really wonderful way that I think set an example for me as well.
And I think he, you know, the way he wrote too was so accessible.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you slipped in a number 11. Actually, it's probably number 21 if we were to really count them up. Good job we don't have a big board saying, no, you can't do that. The Great Initiates, a study of the secret history of religions by Edouard Chouret.
Chouret, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, like I say, it's not a popular book, but it was a book I had very early on, even before I got involved in any of this, where I was like, I wanted to read about Moses, you know, or I wanted to read these different people and see what their lives were like and what happened to them that they, you know, opened up like this and had these lives of such impact. And I forget who all's in there, but there's like these great stories about them all. And I always think, you know, it's so important to honor those who have walked the path before us and grounded a lot of this stuff for us and done a lot of the hard work and left kind of a trail in the ethers for us to follow, you know, and the more we know about their lives and what they went through, there are patterns there, you know,
yeah,
that are
and
useful.
We can relate to them better. They become human rather than gods or, you know, icons or, you know, whoever. They're known as who they are rather than what they did.
Right, right,
Yeah.
right. Because I think, you know, again, we're talking about how everybody has this capacity in them to become, you know, like a master, if you want to use that term, but to have the soul embody it's like, you know, ascension, you know, you turn into the thing you were meant to be, from the sort of negative side to this like glowing genius, expansive, beautiful person. And when the fear goes away, and that's a fascinating thing. I do remember, I forget who told this story, but that Jesus's disciples, you know, each of them had a character flaw, and that after the ascension, the Holy Spirit coming down, they turned into their opposite gift. Like doubting Thomas became the strong one, you know, and John, the beloved, had been the angry one, and you know, and that we have that capacity to change the polarities within us and integrate into something that's even greater than those two opposite things. You know, and that fascinated me as well. You know, it's like, oh, what could you become? You know.
You know, I think I'm going to hold a little private competition here, because along with all the books, you then said, I want to mention a few other authors who affected me.
Sorry.
And you did it so well in one paragraph.
You're right.
And you know, we have to briefly just talk, you know, go across them, just because I think it's a good idea to, you know, Barbara Hand-Clow, David Spangler, Zechariah Sitchin, Lyle Watson, love Lyle Watson's book. I mean, there's so many. Michael Brown, Presence Process.
I love him. Yes, another one coming out of the soul group, you know, that's similar teachings and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, so, and you said that you're grateful to all the clear-minded, beautiful writers who shared themselves so authentically. So, you know, I'm not going to tell too many people other than those that watch this, but I'm going to hold a little silent competition and see who outdoes you with the number that they...
Well, I started reading the other people's stuff, and I go, oh, I wish I'd put that one in there, you know. Like, it's funny to see how many people that I actually know who we had some of the same books. It's great.
Yeah. It's a fascinating exercise for me, and seeing which books come up again and again and again. And also, you know, if I sit and try to guess in advance, you know, who's going to come up with which books, I'm always surprised. Always.
Interesting.
You know, there's always a little surprise in there. So it's endlessly fascinating for me. If you could pick just one of the, we'll call it 11 books, to give to someone who you care about deeply, who's starting out on their path, which one would it be?
Probably Ken Carey's books, I think. Just, they're very beautiful, they're very simple, and they're inspiring, and good for today, I think. I always like to go to an overview and get a sense of like what is really happening, and then drill it down and bring it down into the physical and say, and how, you know, what's going on, or with the mechanics of it all. But Carey's books give that sense of this overview, so we don't go crazy thinking that the world is running amok, that there is a plan, you know, things are unfolding according to a larger vision that is, I think, held by a lot of beings together. There's nothing's by accident, you know, and I do think things are being regulated from a higher level.
I agree with you.
I mean, I have very positive sense about everything, and anyway.
Your books, I want to talk about your books because I read a lot of books, and there are few authors that I come across that I can say I love every book they produce. I always look forward to a book by you because there's a consistency in the way you approach your books, and they are very, very meaty. And I always approach them with great delight because I know I'm going to get a lot out of them. What's your favorite out of your books?
A Leap of Perception, I think. Of course, that's the one that won all the awards as well, you know, but it's not as popular as Frequency at this point, but I think it's the most important and in a way transformative. And Transparency after that really is like a deeper dive into what's going to happen as we get clear, you know, and what might life be like when more than a few people have become more transparent and are open and can see through things and allow themselves to be seen, you know, and how will various specific things in society transform, you know, like government, you know, or, you know, I tried to go through certain kinds of things and see how would business change? How would marriage change? How would, you know, how would the thinking be different?
Yeah, and that is a great book, and it's a very timely book, and it's the sort of thing that I would recommend to anyone who says, I don't understand what's suddenly happening all around me. I think it really gives, you know, a really good picture of what is going on and why.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So before we open it up for questions, we always ask our 10 best contributors to give us these, you know, 3 to 6 short descriptors. And you know, you've already given us yours. You gave us 3, which was writer, author, intuitive, and you're being very formal there. And I want to know, what are the descriptors that you would use maybe not so publicly. What are the things that your friends might describe you as? Something a little bit more intimate so that we get to know Penney behind the books.
Gosh. Some of the things kind of go together. It's like I like gardening and plants, and I like to cook, and I like interior design and creating harmonizing, harmonious environments, beautiful environments, and that includes nature and landscaping and things like that. So I don't know what you would call that, but it has something to do with a sense of connection with homey type things that are beautiful, and like that. And I would say, reverently irreverent or irreverently reverent, one or the other, because
I like that.
I don't like things to be too precious. Everything is beautiful and precious, but also let's not make it so special.
Stick it behind glass.
Right. I like the Buddhist term, nothing special, everything special kind of thing. So I'm not above poking fun at certain things, or doing things that people wouldn't think a spiritual person would do. Just be real, that kind of thing.
Well, good. I'm glad you said those two. I'm going to add them to your page: harmonizer.
Great. Okay.
And irreverently reverent.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
That's good, because
right.
I like to have a little bit of whimsy and playfulness on the page as well, so that people get a slightly different image of you. So let's open it for questions now. Sharon, do we have any questions? Comments?
Yes, we do. Jane says, I don't think we're meant to be followers anymore. So that was back when you were, I don't remember, with one of
Talking about gurus?
Gurus. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was one of hers. The next one is from Frances Mary. It's extensive, so let me just give me a minute to read this. I absolutely love this interview. I would love to sit with a cup of tea with you two ladies and continue this conversation all night long. I was raised a strict Catholic, and when everything was falling apart, I couldn't figure out why, because I was doing everything I was supposed to. It was at that point that I surrendered and unexpectedly gave the universe permission to show me a different way, and I grabbed it. From that point, my thirst for spirituality was unquenchable, and I jumped into the deep end of metaphysical pool. The most amazing, incredible books, people, experience, etc. show up, no drugs involved, and I finally found home, connecting with who I was as a child before being shut down. I don't know what my next what my next is as we go through the day of the earth stood still, which is as challenging as it can be, is the most stunning, brilliant experience to bring the entire planet together, along with the forthcoming disclosure to assist us. Thank you for this fun, intelligent conversation.
Oh, that's lovely. And who was that?
Nice.
This is from Mary, Frances Mary.
That's lovely. Frances Mary. Yeah?
Frances Mary.
Thank you, Frances Mary. That is really lovely. Penny, is there anything you want to say?
Well, there's no question exactly in that, but I think that that a lot of times we may bring in karma from other lives where we've been in religious situations. Like I always think of it like being a monk inside the walls of the monastery and not being able to see out into the marketplace or into the world. And that's a wonderful kind of safe and deep sort of experience. And then in the next life you say, yeah, but I want to go out and see what's going on now. What's beyond the walls here. And I think that often we'll bring in a bit of religious karma with us about dogma and structure and rules until we get to a certain point where we realize that I'd like to expand beyond that, not negate it, but there's more that I want to add into the picture, So I'm not against anything, but I do feel like like sometimes religion has locked down into beliefs some of the direct experience of the universal laws that we could have if we just pay attention really well, you know.
Mm.
Yeah.
Any more, Sharon?
Yes, Jane also said that frequency was a life changer for me. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'm glad.
Yeah, that was a standout for me. I think it was the first one of your books I came across. And I actually, after I read it, I was at the Bodhi Tree bookstore in LA when you were giving a talk about it.
Oh, yeah, I remember that day, that night. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, it really did. For me, it was exactly what I needed to read then. It just affirmed so much. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah.
Have you got another book on the go?
Yes, but I can't say anything about it yet. But it will be like a further dive into transparency and how to work with certain things that are affecting that right now in the world.
When will it be out?
Well, I don't know, because I'm just writing it now. I'm just outlining it and getting it going now. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sharon, anything else?
One last one, it says. This is from Ina. It says, thank you, ladies. I feel incredibly blessed to have come across this book club. I have never joined one because my interests have always been frowned upon. Penney, your book Frequency shifted me so much. Thank you so much. It has been an honor to visit here.
Oh, thank you all.
Thank
you all so much.
Yeah, that's lovely. Good. I'm glad I'm on the same wavelength with everybody.
Really?
Well, if nobody else has anything to say, Penney, is there anything you would like to say, summing up or words of wisdom you'd like to share?
Yeah, I'm really thankful to you for doing this no BS thing, because that's, again, it's irreverently reverent, and and I just think, it is very hard to weed through the amount of material that's out there. I do know that, certain books really appeal to beginners, and they match on that frequency, and then they go along and you get, more sophisticated, and so everything's probably useful. But when you're really looking for the clearest kinds of material, it's so helpful that you are finding these writers, these people, these thinkers that are that you can recommend.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate that.
As far as I'm concerned, it has to be a collective and a community effort that we create this wonderful, archive of books that have sustained so many people. Ultimately, that's what it's going to be, and we're seeing that emerge with the same title showing up. But I just wanted to give people, a guidepost to substance.
Yeah. It's a good idea.
Thank you, Penney. And thank you for joining us today. It's been, I delight in every conversation. So you're going to have to hurry up and write another book so we can have another conversation.
I'll get on it.
Okay, you get on it. Otherwise, we'll just be having conversations regardless. So before we bring this to an end, if you want to experience more of Penney, you can find video and audio recordings at the bottom of her 10 best list page. And we're gradually adding more of these. I've been asking some of our previous contributors, give us a little bit more, give us an excerpt, give us an audio, let people know who you are. And we've got some lovely pieces of Penney on that page so you can experience more of her. And of course, you can also go to her website, where you'll learn a lot more and get to experience a lot more again. So that is penneypeirce.com. You don't need me to spell it, because I'm sure it's up here on Zoom, but I will anyway, which is PENNEYPEIRCE. So thank you, Penney. And thank you to everybody for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, then we'll be posting it on our social media pages. And if you want to share it with your friends, please feel free to do that. And we'll be back at the same time next week when I'll be face to face with the beautiful David Primau. I hope you'll join me. Till then,
Great.
Penny, thank you. And thank you to you for joining us. Till next week.